and welcome again to another episode of Doodling Through Education. I hope you all have been having an excellent week this week and learning a lot. In this episode, we are going to be jumping into week 9 for my classical conversations students, and that is the Age of Absolute Monarchs. And in specific, we're going to talk about 5 of the monarchs that reigned from the 1500s to the 1800s. We'll be talking about Henry VIII of England, Louis the 14th of France, Philip II of Spain, Peter the Great of Russia, and Frederick the Great of Prussia. So, without further delay, let's go ahead and start learning about our first monarch. We are going to start by discussing Henry VIII of England. He was born on June 28, 1491, and died on January 28, 1547. He was the second son of Henry VII, and when his older brother Arthur died in 1502, he then became the heir to the throne. He spent most of his childhood preparing for this duty that would befall upon him. He focused and excelled in book learning and physical education, and when he ascended the throne in 1509, many said it was like springtime in England after the long winter of Henry VII's reign. He then married Arthur's widow, Catherine of Aragon, and decided to partake in military adventure. Against the advice of his counselors, he joined his father-in-law, Ferdinand II, in the military in 1512. Henry truly did not have any military talent, but the appearance of his success was very popular at this time. It was also during this time that Henry found and befriended Thomas Wolsey, and Thomas became Henry's first outstanding minister. Back then, a minister to the king oftentimes advised the monarch and helped to implement his decisions. Wolsey was Archbishop of York, Lord Chancellor of England, and a cardinal of the church, as well as very good friends with the king. So Henry often left him responsible over many affairs. It's important to note that he did not abandon his job, and it was known that Henry always possessed control. In the years 1515 to 1527, it was marked by a strong presence of Wolsey on the scene until Charles V ascended and united the crowns of Spain, Burgundy, which were the Netherlands, and Austria, making all other monarchs at an inferior position in power. At this time, Wolsey tried to reverse alliances and wounded the cloth trade with the Netherlands, proving to Henry that Wolsey's usefulness was indeed coming to an end. The greatness of England was waning, and discontent was rising at home. Feelings came to a boiling point in 1523 to 1524 when Wolsey called a parliament where the taxes were voted upon, and these were voted on below what was necessary. The following year, there was an attempt to levy a special tax, which was met with great resistance, which then forced Henry VIII to take back that order. Another failure that Henry seemed to have was his inability to produce a male heir, which unfortunately contributed to his affair with Anne Boleyn, a lady of the court. Henry then pursued what was called the King's Great Matter during this time, which was simply his desire to divorce from Catherine. This led to a period of confusion for Henry and hope on his part that the Pope and Rome would allow the trial for this divorce. He was also plagued with the thought to just reject Rome outright. This created a revolution and decision that the English Church should in fact split from Rome. This split gave Henry VIII his divorce, and in 1533 he married Anne Boleyn. Unfortunately, Anne was also unable to produce a male heir for him, and this eventually led to her beheading. He then went on to marry a woman named Jane Seymour, who was in fact able to have a son, but sadly she died in childbirth. He then had various other unhappy marriages until his eventual death. So this is not a very happy story overall, but what Henry VIII brought to the table of history was that he presided over the beginnings of the English Reformation, which was unleashed by his own matrimonial decisions. Okay, let's move on from poor, unhappy monarch Henry VIII to our next great monarch, Louis XIV of France. He was born September 5th, 1638, and he died September 1st, 1715. Louis was the son of Louis XIII and the Spanish Queen Anne of Austria. Louis XIV ascended the throne on May 14, 1643, at the young age of only 4 years, 8 months old. Louis was in fact only 9 years old when war broke out between the nobles and the Paris Parliament and the crown due to the hatred of the Prime Minister Jules Cardinal Mazarin. In 1653, Mazarin was victorious and took Louis as his pupil. In 1658, Louis fell in love with Mazarin's niece, but submitted to marrying the daughter of King Philip IV of Spain instead, in order to ensure peace. Mazarin died in 1661, and at this time, the king informed all of his ministers that he would take on full responsibility for ruling the kingdom alone. This was unheard of, with ministers usually helping to rule. So for 54 years, he devoted 8 hours a day to even the smallest detail. He wanted to control everything from troop movement to road building to theological matters. Louis is known for the great architectural buildings that he put up during his reign, including Versailles. In 1667, he invaded the Spanish Netherlands, which he regarded as part of his wife's inheritance, which began then a series of wars that lasted for the majority of the rest of his reign. Louis is known as the monarch that brought France to its pinnacle, although was often in isolation from the people. Overall, he wanted France to be powerful and magnificent without being overly concerned with the French people. Our next great monarch is Philip II of Spain. He was born on May 21st, 1527, and died September 13th, 1598. He was the son of Holy Roman Emperor Charles V and Isabella of Portugal. Philip was the King of Spain and King of the Portuguese, and is often known as the champion of the Roman Catholic Counter-Reformation. He was known as a man who seemed to always want more information when needing to make a decision, which was a painstaking affair for a system that was already known for its delays. He also often was very suspicious of even his most faithful servants. This is thought to be due to his father at times writing to him with the warning to never trust anyone. This poisonous environment seemed to poison the whole of the Spanish government and is thought to have contributed to the 80 Years' War and several rebellions. Now, he wasn't all bad. Spain's literary golden age happened during this time as a direct result from Philip's love of books. He also sought to preserve peace with his neighbors in Western Europe due to his major naval war with the Ottoman Empire and the rebellions in the Netherlands. When Philip II died of cancer in 1598, Spain was still at the height of its power. It took almost 50 years before it was clear that the Counter-Reformation would make no further major conquests. Now, our next monarch during this age was Peter the Great of Russia. He was born in 1672 and died in 1725. He was one of his country's greatest statesmen, organizers, and reformers. So let's jump into his story. When his father, Alexis, died in 1676, Peter was only 4 years old. His older half-brother, a sickly youth, then succeeded to the throne as Fyodor III. But, in fact, power instead fell into the hands of the Miloslavskis, relatives of Fyodor's mother. They deliberately pushed Peter and the Narishkin circle aside. When Fyodor died childless in 1682, a fierce struggle for power ensued between the Miloslavskis and the Narishkins. The Miloslavskis wanted Fyodor's brother Ivan V on the throne. The Narishkins stood for the healthy and intelligent Peter. Ivan and Peter were then proclaimed joint Tsars, and eventually, because of Ivan's bad health and Peter's youth, Ivan's 25-year-old sister, Sophia, was made regent. Clever and influential, Sophia took control of the government. On the other hand, Peter, who was excluded from public affairs, lived with his mother in a village near Moscow, often fearing for his own safety. All of this left an impression on the young Tsar and determined his negative attitude toward the government. In August 1689, a new revolt of the government took place. Sophia and her faction tried to use it to their own advantage, but events turned decisively in Peter's favor. He removed Sophia from power and then banished her to a convent where she was forced to become a nun. Though Ivan V remained nominally joint Tsar with Peter, the administration was now largely given over to Peter's kinsmen, the Narishkins, until Ivan's death in 1696. Peter, meanwhile, continuing his military and nautical amusements, sailed the first seaworthy ships to be built in Russia. Overall, Peter saw himself as the state's servant, and whenever he put himself in a subordinate position, he would perform his duties with the same ideas that he demanded of others. He began his own army service in the lowest rank, and required others likewise to master their profession from its elements upward, and to expect promotion only for services of real value. Peter's personality left its imprint on the whole history of Russia. He was smart, exuberant, courageous, industrious, and iron-willed, and he could face complex situations to uphold consistently the interests of Russia and his own particular designs. He did not completely bridge the gap between Russia and the Western world, but he achieved much progress in development of the economy, trade, education, science, culture, and foreign policy in Russia. Under him, Russia became a great power, which impacted all of Europe. And we come to our last monarch that we will be talking about today, and that is Frederick the Great of Prussia. He was born January 17th, 1712, and died August 17th, 1786. A brilliant military campaigner who, in a series of diplomatic moves and wars against Austria and other powers, greatly enlarged Prussia's territories and made Prussia the foremost military power in Europe. Frederick ascended the throne in 1740 and quickly let his ministers know that he alone would be the one making the decisions. Frederick ranks among the 2 or 3 dominant figures in the history of modern Germany. Under his leadership, Prussia became one of the great states of Europe. From early in his reign, Frederick achieved a high reputation as a military commander, and the Prussian army rapidly became a model admired and imitated in many other states. He also emerged quickly as a leading exponent of the ideas of enlightened government, which were then becoming influential throughout much of Europe. His example did much to spread and strengthen those ideas. Both by his accomplishments and by his example, Frederick deeply influenced the course of German history indeed. In the struggles of the 1740s and 50s, he weakened still further the structure of the Holy Roman Empire. The bitter Austro-Prussian rivalry that he began was to be a dominant political force in Germany and Central Europe for well over a century. And that is all we have for today. Thank you again for diving into history with me and learning all about these monarchs. I hope you have a great rest of your week, learn a lot, and remember to be kind, follow God's will, and take care. Bye.